Today is one of the Sophianic holidays, for which reason we in the Western Church wear the white vestments, and some of the scriptures are devoted to a Sophianic theme. And a tiny bit of only attempted explanation might be useful, to the extent that this is probably the Gospel of Philip, probably one of the most, to a lot of people, would be the most puzzling Gospel readings, because in them it is stated by many, many different translations that Mary Magdalene is the beloved of the Lord, and that she was, as it were, his chief and beloved disciple. And these sorts of things annoy some people. Other people rejoice over them, and other people don't give a hoot. So, it just depends on how you look at the situation. But let us say I think that particularly in the more esoteric aspects of Judaism, which of course the Lord Christ may be ascribed to, Mary Magdalene was regarded as the feminine counterpart of the Messiah, who was welcomed into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and who was regarded apparently by a sizable group of Jewish people at that time as the Messiah, as the Redeemer, who would redeem the Jewish people and all the other good people from their afflictions. So that needs to be kept in mind. And the other aspect, let us see, again, I think needs to be looked at with a sharp eye. Who are we, 2,000 years later, to tell Jesus Christ that he can't have a girlfriend? Who? Bunch of Dummkopfs, in German we would call them, which means Dumm is stupid, and Kopf is head, a stupid head, and that is true. So whatever the Lord Christ has done, really done, and not just rumored and so forth, we accept. Why? Because he is the Lord Christ, and he has brought us some wonderful, enduring, mysterious gifts, such as the Holy Eucharist, such as the Holy Communion and the wine, and for that and all of his saving work, we are grateful, and we go on. Now, of course, particularly over the last, 20 years or so, there has been a considerable hullabaloo about Mary Magdalene, which started out with some legends in France, where no use really going into it, but where the Merovingian dynasty, the original royal house of France, which then was replaced by the Carolingians and then replaced by others, that in the Merovingian dynasty, it is acknowledged in a roundabout way that Jesus Christ and his spiritual consort Mary Magdalene are the founders of the mystery. And that is very understandable, because if you look into the mysteries of Greece, you look in the mysteries of Egypt especially, and so forth, it is always acknowledged that there is a a pair of a man and a woman who officiate and institute the mystery. So what we need to keep in mind are maybe to draw some conclusions from that rather than get upset over it. Actually, the Holy Blood, Holy Grail was one of the least interesting and least well books that I ever read. I added another title to it: Holy Blood, Holy Grail, Holy Balderdash. So if you, why? Because to my great chagrin, and to the chagrin perhaps of others, I know my history. And it's utterly unhistoric, and it's an attempt at this later date, an unsuccessful attempt to try to restore the Merovingian dynasty of Clovis, to the throne of France. Anyway, if anybody should be restored, it should be the House of Bourbon, the descendants and the relatives of the martyred King Louis XVI, and everything else is of less significance. But let us say that while their speculations take place about history, this, that, and the other thing, but there is truly local legendary in the south of France, on the coastline near Lyon, where particularly with the gypsy folk, who are sort of old-time friends of mine because they were friends of my father's, and because I saw them practically every other week in rural Hungary, because, the Hungarian gypsies, they're really gypsies. So let's say it is to be understood, let us say, that there are secret traditions which may or may not have a historical basis, and that among them is the one that declares to the gypsies that the three Marys, Mary, his mother, Mary Magdalene, and another mysterious Mary whom nobody has heard about, only the gypsies, who is often called Afra or Black Mary, which, you can speculate that there might be some African. After all, the majority of the worshippers in Egypt were Africans. In any event, they said that the three Marys arrived in the south of France, I think in the province and the state of Toulouse, and then remained there. And there are actually churches, chapels, associations, clubs that are in reverence of the three Marys. So that somewhat coincides with what we hear from the Gospel of Philip. So what we need to keep in mind then is the fact that in various ways, and with somebody like Jesus, we need to assume that among the ways there was a very mystical and very Gnostic one, that there was a recognition of the presence in the work of salvation and in the mission of Jesus Christ of the feminine element. Whether it was called Mary of Magdala, which is a town in old Palestine, or whatever, or in some other form, and that there were feminine collaborators of Jesus Christ. You might almost say that if you want to use that term, there were feminine apostles. And that is perfectly understandable, very much in keeping with the prophetic tradition in Israel, because whatever else one may say about the Hebrew traditions, it was always there that the feminine has a soul, that women have a soul, and that therefore women can be apostles or friends of the Messiah just as much as anybody else. So that is, I think, is a foreshadowing of the present time, when there is more and more recognition being given to the feminine principle, and should be given especially in spiritual matters, because it is a tradition that's older than the four Gospels, and of very great, not only of very great antiquity, but of very great authority, that indicates that way, way up in the aeons, long before the Lord Christ came to be incarnate of the Virgin Mary in Nazareth, there was a feminine counterpart, a messianic feminine person there working with him, and to acknowledge that and to build that into our mythos to some extent and degree, I think is a very good idea. Because obviously, from a Gnostic point of view, first of all, just think of it a little bit. A feminine being would and has, according to the Gospels, brought the baby Christ into the world. A feminine being was there at the crucifixion, praying and asking for mercy from above. And in every way, if we look into the details, the feminine principle in the form of living and walking women was very much a part of the Lord Christ's mission. So that has been somewhat obscured in later times is understandable, because the regard in which women were held, especially right subsequent to the time of Jesus, was not a very high one. But the issue comes up again and again throughout history that there were some very important women there, and not only that, but that sort of the presence, the feminine presence among the followers of Jesus had been neglected, and that when some of it is discovered, then I think it's a great and wonderful discovery. And I'll just throw in one thing, because if indeed our often interrupted plans are not interrupted too much, then in the next couple of months we hope to show you a movie that is called the Milky Way. Now, this is not the one that I promised earlier, but that one will show. And the Milky Way is a very early motion picture that was designed and shot by a Spanish movie maker, whose name obviously doesn't occur to me. Luis Buñuel. See, then I remember the first name, you remember the last name. We can do. So Luis Buñuel, a wild, anarchistic, weirdo movie maker, which among movie makers is permissible. When they turn politicians, then I say, come on, stop it, buddy. But let's say the Luis Buñuel builds a portion of his Milky Way on the custom in Spain, where there is a great place of pilgrimage that is usually attributed to the alleged burial site of St. James the Apostle, and that this belief that St. James is buried in this strange place way on the southeastern coast of Spain, and there are pilgrimages going there even now. So no use reviewing the movie for you right now, but let's keep in mind that there is, for instance, one of the figures who is there in several ways in that movie is Bishop Priscillan of Avila, who was a Gnostic, no doubt about it. And then he was given the kind of treatment that Gnostics usually received, but there is an encounter with him that always, from the first time that I saw that motion picture, stuck in my mind. It's deep in the forest somewhere in Spain. There's a little clearing, and in the clearing sit a considerable number of people, mostly women, and in the center is the exiled Bishop of Avila, Priscillianus, and that's what I have a pretty good biography of him, and not too much is found about him. But let us say what we have there is that Priscillan mostly appealed to the women. I think he was a pretty good-looking bishop, which is not unknown even today, I'm sure. Even in ripe, very ripe, super ripe old age. But let's say, as such, he became controversial and eventually was, as heretics usually were, executed. Although Saint Martin of Tours, another canonized saint who is really a Hungarian saint, because Saint Martin of Tours was born in Pannonia, which is the present-day Hungary. And it is known that Martin of Tours said, if we are going to the Council of Lyon, I think, he said that if we are going to begin to execute people because they think differently from the rest of us, then we are going to be a very sorry religion. And maybe he was right. But let's say there is an indication of that element in the movie that is interesting to contemplate. And also I have a friend who is a very well placed Spanish gentleman living in America now. He was a personal friend of the king, who since then abdicated, and arising from, which is everybody over there in that part of Spain says that it's not not St. James, who is buried in Compostela. That is what we are talking about. But it is the saint, the martyr whom I just mentioned, Priscillan of Avila. Yeah, and so he, my friend, who is of course a wild man. That's the only friends worth having, you know. Or if most of them are wild people, then you have good friends. You have to keep that in mind. There is maybe a wild person, maybe not. In any event, that it is a general popular belief that the body buried in Compostela is the body of Priscillan of Avila rather than of St. James. But it's a saint anyway, so people go there in large numbers, and really quite an interesting phenomenon. But what we need to keep in mind that this was, of course, the ancient belief when they were Gnostic type people there. So with that, I think I will conclude my ranting and raving to indicate that, let's say, clear down into the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, there were people in the Christian church, some of them officials like Priscillan, who was a bishop, who were apparently very much along the feminine orientation, and whose followers were mostly women, and that is of some importance. So that harkens back that for centuries thereafter, the kind of thing that is mentioned to us in the Gospel of Philip was going on. Now, what the details of it were, this and that, and the other thing, that is of no great import. But the import is that there have always been people who were, for one reason or another, martyred, and that they are still regarded sort of in the shadows as saints rather than as heretics like Priscillan. If anybody wants to read the book on Priscillan, I think I can find it, but you better give it back to me, because believe it or not, even with my amount of research, that is the only book about Priscillan that I ever found somewhere for sale. So I kind of value that book, therefore it is mine, all mine. In any event, it's the Milky Way is actually the name given to that path of pilgrimage, which starts in France, goes all through Spain, and then ends at Santiago de Compostela. So that is let's say, also points toward the possibility that the feminine element, the feminine principle, was active in the early church, and probably more likely to be active in the Sophianic kind of orientation of Gnostics than otherwise. So let's keep that in mind, because this is again the time of the year which is important for us to remember these particular issues and to contemplate them and keep them in mind in regard to the early history of the Church. So may the mystery of that which hangs with heaven and earth descend upon us and remain with us always. Amen.